Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another fabulous installment of Weekend Update. From very high above all the puerile and pedantic forms of Wyoming mainstream media, this is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Saturday. It seems that Judge Melissa Owens in Teton County finally got one right. Let's be perfectly honest, on this one, it would be pretty difficult for her not to get the right answer. There again, though, almost all of us were baffled when she unilaterally decided that abortion was health care. By definition, if you're killing a baby, that's not really providing for its health or its welfare. Ah, yes, but I forget, in the whole abortion debate, we're only concerned about the health care of the mother and not of the little baby that's growing inside her. For those of you who are unaware, which if you're listening to Cowboy State Politics, then you kind of are aware of all these things, but if you're not, Judge Melissa Owens in Teton County has already declared twice now that abortion is health care and that two bills banning abortion, or bills that would effectively ban abortion, were to be overturned in Wyoming. Those two pieces of legislation, the abortifacients ban and the Life is a Human Right Act, are now at the Wyoming Supreme Court awaiting a decision from Kate Fox and her merry band of black-robed judges. Hopefully they will get the right answer this time. Meanwhile, our not-so-judicious judge in Jackson has shockingly decided that indeed the legislature can regulate the medical industry. If you ask me, it's pretty amazing that we don't already have some regulations on abortion clinics. We regulate everything else. For example, cosmetology. There's a whole big, gigantic list of regulations that have to be followed just so you can get your hair cut. Until this past legislative session, if you were a cosmetologist, you had to have a license to braid somebody's hair. I kid you not. But for a really long time, and until just a few months ago, that was the law. And with that service, there's not even anything sharp that's involved. No razors, no shears, no scissors. I've been told, by the way, that they're not scissors, they're shears when they're in a salon. The things you learn when you marry a hairstylist. But my point is, if we can regulate an industry at such a granular level, it doesn't make much sense that we can't regulate an abortion clinic. After all, when compared with hair braiding, an abortion is an infinitely more invasive medical procedure. Though it happens far more than abortion advocates are willing to admit, every year there are numerous women that die from having an abortion. And that doesn't even include the other well-documented cases of medical complications as a result of taking the abortion pill outside of the gestational period of when it's effective. And I've never heard of someone kicking the bucket after being at a hair salon. And yet we regulate that industry down to the finest detail. But when the legislature decides to pass any sort of regulation concerning an abortion, there is an immediate lawsuit that's filed. That was definitely the case with House Bill 42, the regulation of surgical abortions. Shockingly, before this bill, you didn't have to be a licensed physician to perform an abortion in the state of Wyoming. The bill does a couple of other things, such as requiring an abortion clinic to be a licensed ambulatory facility, and that the person performing the abortion had to have admitting privileges at a hospital no less than 10 miles from the clinic. All of this sounds pretty common sense to me. If you're going to perform an invasive medical procedure where one possible outcome of it is death, then you probably need to be pretty close to a hospital. And I want the person that's doing the procedure to be a licensed doctor. Now, of course, and you've heard me say this several times, that I don't agree with abortion at all. I think it's murder. But since two abortion bans are caught up in the Wyoming Supreme Court, at the very least, we should regulate the abortion clinic. If we have to have procedures that kill babies, we should do it the safest way possible. An oxymoron, I admit. Immediately after House Bill 42 was signed by the governor, a lawsuit was filed in Natrona County. And then the plaintiffs in that case didn't think things were progressing fast enough, so they withdrew the lawsuit from Natrona County and refiled it in Teton County in front of judicial legislator Melissa Owens. a clear case of judge shopping. If you ask me, the lawsuit that was filed in Natrona County was done only for expediency. That was the court that they could get to the fastest. The rest of this story, which it's probably not going to be the end of it, but for now, the rest of it is that Melissa Owens tossed their ridiculous claim that the legislature can't regulate an abortion clinic. From a clearly grieving Wildpile in an article entitled "Judge Dismisses Suit Against Wyoming's New Anti-Abortion Laws," and I quote, "The same Teton County judge who tossed Wyoming's 2 abortion bans last year dismissed on Friday a separate lawsuit filed in Jackson that sought to block 2 new Wyoming abortion laws, saying the case belonged in Natrona County, home to the affected Wellspring Health Access Clinic. Ruling from the bench after a hearing that lasted more than 90 minutes, 9th District Judge Melissa Owens said that, quote, any injury that occurred in Natrona County. The ruling means that Wyoming women who have not had access to abortion services since the de facto ban went into effect February 28th will have to wait until the case is presumably refiled and then considered by a different judge. In the 5 days that one law went into effect, Wellspring referred 56 patients to other clinics for abortion-related services, almost all of them out of state, according to court papers." End quote. And so, normally judicial legislator Melissa Owens saw the lawsuit filed in her court in Teton County for what it was, an attempt to shop for a favorable judge. So that's where we're at on the abortion front. Also happening yesterday, House Bill 156 finally went into law without the governor's signature. This marks the 5th bill of the Wyoming Freedom Caucus's 5 and Dime plan that has become law in the state of Wyoming. Yesterday, I sat down with Wyoming Representative Rep Pendergraft to talk about the 5 and Dime plan, and we'll do that in just a minute. But first, a completely outrageous and unabashed exposition of American capitalism.
Some say standing up for what you believe in is being extreme. Ask any woman in Wyoming. They'll tell you this is called courage. The mainstream media claims that holding the line on important issues is being unreasonable. My mom taught me this is called staying true to our principles. In other places, people argue you always have to compromise to get something done. Here in Wyoming, we know that some things are worth protecting at all costs. Some say it's time we give up on the values that made our state great to accommodate toxic culture. I say it's time to stand tall and protect the values that have served Wyoming well for over 134 years. Join Honor Wyoming as we defend and preserve the Wyoming way of life. Find out how you can make a difference today.
Visit honorwyoming.org. Are you one of those people that said something like this before Trump became president?
I have a house in Spain that is going to be ready right after the election.
Siberia,
Nova Scotia.
I'm definitely moving to Canada.
Straight to hell. Iceland.
France.
Asia's pretty cool.
And has the past 5 weeks just been more than you could bear? If that's the case, you have come to the right place. All you need to do is call my friend Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. She has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market all across the state of Wyoming. Last year, she sold around $30 million worth of property. Everything from small residential properties all the way up to big giant ranches. So if you've got to get the heck out of Dodge, if you've got to be gone Johnson because you can't stand that Trump is the president, call Rebecca Bextel. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. Let me say that one more time for you in case you missed it. 307-699-3519. Today's program is also brought to you by the Wyoming Cartridge Company. They're a Wyoming-based ammunition manufacturer. Actually, their factory is right around the corner from the Cowboy State Politics studio. They make a quality product at a fair price. And I can tell you for a fact, my friends, their ammunition holds a pattern just as tight as any other box of shells that you're going to get off the shelf. I've burned through several boxes of Wyoming Cartridge Company ammunition. You're going to buy it anyway, so you may as well get it from a Wyoming company. Go to their website, wyocc.com. That's the Wyoming Cartridge Company. Make sure that you subscribe and follow the program. That way you can be notified every single time there's a brand new episode of Cowboy State Politics. You can do that from the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. And don't forget about the live program, which is broadcast every Tuesday through Friday, beginning at 8 a.m. on Facebook, YouTube, X, and on Rumble. And now, back to the program. The 5 and dime plan has passed. I have to tell you, I was a little skeptical as to whether or not all 5 of the Freedom Caucus's bills would go through. But evidently they have. And to talk about them this morning, I've roped in my pal, Ken Pendergraft, Representative Ken Pendergraft, or as I'm going to refer to him from here on out, Agent 29. Ken, welcome to the show.
You've been talking to Tom.
That's true. It's true. I did hear him refer to you.
Agent 30.
Agent 30, yes.
Kind of a little inside joke. Hey, thanks for roping me.
Yeah.
I wish next time you would use a little softer latigo.
No, we don't do that here. So, Ken, the 5 and dime plan has passed, and I thought we ought to talk to one of the people in the Freedom Caucus about it. So I guess my first question for you would be, what exactly is in the 5 and dime plan? It's been a long time since you guys rolled that thing out, so why don't you give us a refresher?
Sure. Thanks for the question. I had to get a refresher myself. It has been a long time. Plus, after we got the 5 and dime passed, and I'll explain that in just a second, we moved on to other priorities. And so the focus kind of became there, and it became the budget. So it's kind of going back. But, excuse me, I'm still getting over the crud from...
Well, it's swamp sickness is what I call it.
That's good. That's good. Well, one of the first things that we talked about in the 5 and dime, and the 5 and dime plan was simply a little catchphrase for passing 5 bills that we and others and the polling data reflected were important to the people of Wyoming. We thought if we are representatives of the people, then perhaps we ought to represent them instead of agencies or other organizations. So that's what we did, and we came up with 5 things that were very high on people's mind. And the first one was election integrity. We ran
a zillion bills.
over 40 bills, and people say, well, couldn't you have just kind of combined some of those? And some of that was done. But when you combine them, then you kind of put all your eggs in one basket, and one veto takes care of all of them. The way we did, it was really hard for everybody to go back and refuse over and over and over again. And I think it was a good tactic. We got a lot of good things done. We didn't get everything done that we wanted to do. But the major one, the prominent one that we talked about, was only Wyoming people should be allowed to vote in Wyoming elections. That sounds like an absolute no-brainer, right?
It does.
But Wyoming is the first state in the union to have such a law.
See, and I find that so hard to believe.
Well, I guess that the other side of it is, why do we have to have that law? It should be like a presumption, and not rebuttable presumption is a phrase that I learned this year. But the last bill to fall fell on the very, very last day that it could possibly happen, and the governor allowed this bill, which was championed by Secretary of State Chuck Gray and run by none other than John Baer. It was House Bill 156, and that's precisely what it said. You're going to have to prove you're a Wyoming citizen to vote in a Wyoming election. Doesn't seem like a very big ask, but apparently it was. And the governor allowed it to go into law without his signature, and wrote a pretty nasty...
I read it. It was kind of a scathing letter.
Yeah, and it's typical of, I think he got away with 7 vetoes, I think it was, after we left. We put 5 of them right back down his throat, frankly. We overrode those in very short order in both chambers, and certainly would have done more. And people say, well, how come he didn't stick around? there are a lot of very good reasons for that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah. One of the biggest ones is that this summer we have to do a recalibration for the K-12 basket of goods, we call it. How are we going to fund K-12 education? If we save that for the budget session, we have very little time. And also in the budget session, anything that isn't directly budget related has to have that two-thirds
vote,
vote to get in. And we thought, if we got 3 days, we can call a special session and work on recalibration. There are several rules that can be suspended or moved to move something through. And then it's only a simple majority to get something introduced and passed. And we felt like that was the best chance. And you got to understand that in the last basically 20 years, we've had recalibration efforts, but we've never been successful in coming back and putting something together. So critically important that we save whatever time we have for that. We also feel pretty confident that we'll be able to bring some of these other things back in pretty short order and run them back. You might remember when the House Appropriations Committee looked at the last budget. That's what I do. You'd think I'd remember the word budget.
You would think.
Yeah. We looked at the last budget, and there were several line item vetoes in it. And one of the first things we did was go back and push back on those. We took them out, put them back into the budget, something we were able to do at that point. And we look forward to being able to turn the tables, turn the cards on what the governor has done to reject what were veto-proof majorities. I mean, the legislature passed these bills in flying colors.
And looking at all the bills that he vetoed, including the ones that you were able to overturn, that the House and the Senate were able to overturn, there were a couple of them that passed out of the legislature with pretty sizable majorities, House Bill 64 being one of those. And I think that what you saw from the governor's veto pen was his outright partisanship, that he's a lame duck, not going to run for office anymore, even though there's that rumor that he'll run for a third term. I don't believe that for a second. But he doesn't have anything to lose now, and you can see his opinion in his vetoes.
Which, by the way, is a terrific argument, and I'm not going to go down this rabbit trail very far, terrific argument against term limits.
Oh, yeah.
Can you imagine if half the Senate were term limited out, what might happen?
It would be a disaster.
It certainly could be. We'll leave that for another day and another show. Election integrity was very prominent on people's minds. We ran a lot of bills. We probably got about a dozen of them passed, and they're helpful. Some ones that we wanted to get rid of but didn't was, getting rid of the drop boxes.
Yeah, that one I was pretty upset about that one getting killed.
It is what it is, and I reminded some of the freshmen. They were lamenting the fact, we didn't get this, we didn't get that. We missed 4 good bills that we should have had, or something along those lines. And until now, it's been, man, we got 4 bills passed.
Right.
It was amazing. So we did some good things. No matter what Commissioner Lonnie Wright has to say, he said we were a clown show.
Well, of course he did, because Lonnie Wright is a redcoat.
And former legislator and now bureaucrat Cyrus Western also said basically the same thing. So that's the narrative, but when you look at what we actually got accomplished, it was outstanding. Not one of the 5 and dime bills, but just getting rid of gun-free zones.
Yeah, that was a big one.
And sometime at length we should talk about that one. There's still some work to do there, but we made some progress.
All right, so you talked about election integrity.
Yeah.
What's next on the list?
Immigration, and I would point folks to begin with to House Bill 116. This one was, prime sponsor was Pepper Ottman. God bless her. She's fun to be around. I don't know how much time you had to spend with Pepper, but she's a trip. So what this does is make driver's licenses issued to unauthorized aliens invalid in Wyoming. Now, unauthorized aliens, we didn't put those words in there. We're talking illegal immigrants. If the very first thing you do is come to this country and break all the laws that come in, what rights have you?
You shouldn't have any.
So again, this felt like a no-brainer, and we got that one passed. I didn't write down all the vote tallies on them, but they most of them got through. In pretty good shape.
As I recall, all of the big bills left the House with pretty good majorities. Now, I can't speak for what happened in the Senate because in many cases that was just kind of chaos. But
Yeah.
I have to tell you, Ken, I really was pretty surprised that all of the 5 priorities coming out of House leadership went through. And what I thought in the beginning of the session is, well, they may come out, but they'll be heavily amended. But I stand corrected. That did not happen.
And that's one of the things that we were told we could not govern. We said, this is what we want to do. We want to pass 5 bills in 10 days. We passed them in 8. And we passed them with substantial majorities in virtually every case. We sent them over to the Senate, which, as you said, had some issues. They came out of there pretty much unscathed. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of coalescing behind the scenes, and we got it done. Now, if that's not governing, I don't know what is.
Well, certainly we have a bicameral legislature, and I think this session was probably the perfect example of that, where you have 2 independent bodies that have in many cases, very different ways of looking at legislation. But that's how our system is set up, and it's supposed to kind of work that way. It's what we've seen in years past has been a kind of unicameral legislature, because the redcoats were pretty much in charge of anything, and anything they wanted passed pretty much went through. And I guess maybe we could say the last session there were some bumps in the road because we had more conservatives.
We had enough to be able to put some bumps in there. I want to push back a little bit on that term, bicameral, because every time I go into the fishbowl, I see at least a dozen cameras looking at me. Sorry, I couldn't.
All right, so what's number 3 on your list?
DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is something that has infected a number of companies like BlackRock. And we thought it was silly to be investing our hard-earned money in a company that is doing everything it can to work against you. And it didn't work that way. We also felt like we should not be paying money to the University of Wyoming, for example, who turns around and does the same thing and works against our interests. I'm kind of morphing that, with ESG. But the DEI, if you look at the Wyoming Constitution says everybody's equal.
Yep, all members of the human race are
What
equal.
more do you need?
Well, and this is something I covered on the live program on Friday, is that it is kind of a sad commentary that we have to have bills that say, no, really, you do have to follow the Constitution. And, the example I used was the SEPA bill. The SEPA bill that we passed, 2-3 years ago, it basically says, no, you have to pay attention to the Constitution. And there's a lot of examples where we pass legislation like that. And, this DEI bill is one of them.
Yeah.
And actually, there were a couple different bills that kind of relate to that.
Yeah, the main one that we're talking about, and like I said, forgive me for mentioning BlackRock and going down, there's too many acronyms in this business, and it's easy to get yourself down the wrong track to begin with. But the DEI bill, Rachel Rodriguez Williams ran that one. It was House Bill 147. This bill specifies that no governmental agency shall engage in any diversity, equity, or inclusion program, activity, or policy. Again, it's like belt and suspenders, we like to call it, to the Constitution. The Constitution says we're all equal. That ought to be sufficient. But sometimes it seems like we need to pound it and say it 3 or 4 different ways.
No, we really mean it this time.
Yeah. Anyway, there are other elements to that, but we managed to get that accomplished, and very happy with that. ESG, I started down that path.
That's one of the bills that didn't pass.
Social governance. Look at Senate File 191, though. There's a little surprise there, because that bill did pass. And this is state funds, proxy voting, pecuniary investments. Most people look at that and say, oh, they can't be.
Yeah, my eyes glaze over when I hear those words.
But we're talking about how do we invest the state's funds, essentially that $30 billion that we talk about. And one of the things this act does is it requires that investment entities have to provide management oversight of the voting proxies. These funds have proxy voting just because it's virtually impossible to afford enough people to go do all of those votes on there. But they have to provide us with a statement, and then they're reviewed by the Treasurer's office. And they can look for votes that we didn't particularly like and can preempt that or change that, or we have some leeway there. So that's important. This act also requires that each investment entity make fiduciary decisions based only on pecuniary factors, which are those that are prudently determined to have a positive effect on returns and that do not include the furtherance of environmental, social, governance, political, or ideological interests. And we got that passed.
So why then the separate ESG bill that didn't pass?
This was added to this bill after the ESG failed.
Ah, okay.
So there's more than one way to skin a skinny cat, and we took advantage of that, and I'm quite glad that we were able to do that.
Well, wasn't that kind of, and one of the criticisms of the ESG bill was that, well, this is what we're already doing. We're kind of passing a bill that really just, I guess, ratifies what we're already doing.
The state treasurer did have policies that kind of put up the sideboards on that and kept them away from there. But there's a lot of wiggle room in those things, and what this did was just tighten that up. So
okay, well, there's
count that as a victory.
A couple other pieces of this whole DEI part. We got
now we went back to DEI. Don't do what I did. We were on ESG.
Yeah. Well, so we got the What is a Woman Act passed.
Oh yeah.
And I was really concerned about that one because it didn't clear committee of the whole until the very last day. It was the very last bill that the Senate talked about. Again, this is another piece of legislation that you would think in Wyoming we shouldn't really have to talk about this.
If you're a livestock producer and you don't understand how that works, you're going to go away pretty fast.
Let me ask you this, Ken. We always hear from the other side that, well, this isn't happening in Wyoming. This really isn't a problem where we're having a difficulty defining what a man and what a woman is. Do you think that's really a problem in our state?
We always hear this isn't happening in Wyoming right before the headlines break out where, yes, it is, yes, it is, yes, it is. The other thing is that we don't want to make all of our laws reactionary. We want to look ahead. We want to be farsighted. We want to preempt things before they ever get started. A good example of this is what Lori Bratton did, Representative Bratton, Agent 51, if you will. She and her husband, Rich, had done a tremendous amount of work on what the actual percentages of the effect of the property tax cut was going to be on cities and counties. And they had the numbers down pat.
Yeah.
They have worked it beautifully. And I look forward to having them on the show and having them share with you what they found. And it was tremendous. So when they got back into Sheridan County, one of the first things Lori did is go sit down with county commissioners, with city councilmen, and say, look, these are the numbers. If you want to go out there and tout your story that the sky is falling, go right ahead. But we are going to publish the numbers. We're going to prove exactly what the case is. And if you want to make a fool of yourself, go ahead.
Yeah.
And you did not hear the same thing coming out of the folks here at our town halls and our forums as you did in other parts of the state. And I put the blame for that, squarely on Rich and Lori's lap.
No, I think
did a
that
tremendous job.
Yeah, and knowing the work that they had done before, well, Rich started his study of this before Lori was even elected. A lot of work went into it, and, you're right, I really haven't heard that we're going to be firing police in Sheridan, and you're going to have to put out your own fires because the fire department has been defunded. You haven't heard that. Now, other places in the state, Rock Springs is a great example. There have been some pretty rowdy town halls down there, and I really don't think that the message has got out to in Sweetwater County. And I'm just using that as an example. There's a lot of different places, if you pay attention on social media, that the sky still is falling. When in reality, we're still talking single-digit cuts.
Yeah, Sheridan was affected probably more than almost any other county. Teton was the worst. But Sheridan County had less ag land and more single property owners. And they're the ones that pay that tax. And it comes down to about 6% for Sheridan County. And it varies. There are other levels in there. But it's not 25, 30, 50%.
No.
And when you put that in light of the fact that for the past 4 or 5 years, they have enjoyed unprecedented windfalls, and they've got money stashed up in a lot of places. If they don't, it was through absolutely lousy management.
Let's take another quick break and get a word in from our sponsors.
Many Americans are growing increasingly concerned about the rapidly growing U.S. government deficits, recognizing the additional printing of paper money devalues U.S. currency. To compensate, American gold and silver coins will provide wealth protection. U.S. Coin Capital provides physical gold and silver coins delivered directly to our clients. You can reach us at 1-800-878.
Today's program is also brought to you by Morton Buildings. If you're in the market for any type of metal structure, whether it's a barn or a garage or a roping arena or maybe something a lot bigger, like a giant warehouse for your business, the two guys you need to talk to are Nick and Jesse at Morton Buildings. They are the experts in metal building construction. They've been doing it longer than anybody else, and they definitely do a much better job than anyone else around. So it doesn't matter what building it is, give Nick and Jesse a call. Their phone number is 307-674-2532, or you can check them out at their website, mortonbuildings.com. And now, the conclusion to our program. All right, so we're kind of talking about property tax relief, which, if I'm not mistaken, that was one of the 5 and dime plans.
It was, and the first thing we did, we had what was House Bill 169, and it was a 50% tax credit, and originally we had talked about it at 25%, but when the People's Initiative came out, we thought, well, let's go ahead and bump it to 50%. Plus, when you go to the negotiating table, that gives you a little bit of a window. So we bumped it to 50% with a 50% backfill that lasted for a couple of years, and then it dropped to 25% and extended. I might be confusing some of them, but when you do so many different bills and there's so many amendments, you get a little bit. But anyway, we passed a couple of different 50% tax breaks through the House that ended up failing in the Senate. The one that actually came through in the end was Senate File 69. Originally, it was set for 50%, and it ultimately got pushed back to 25%. I was a little reluctant to see that, but this is a game of give and take, and we got what we got out of it.
Okay, so let me ask you a question on that. The People's Initiative will be on the ballot in 2026.
Yeah.
And one version, I think it was one of the zillion amendments that was added to this, basically said if the People's Initiative passes, then this piece of legislation will go away. Is that provision in Senate File 69?
Yes, it is. There's another bill that ranks the priority. People say, well, there's a lot of different exemptions out there. For example, if you're over 65 and you've been paying for 25 years, you can get an exemption. But you can't double up. You can't take this one along with that one. It's an either-or type thing. And I believe it's in that bill. Forgive me if I don't remember all the details off the top of my head. But, yeah, if the Citizens Initiative goes through, it basically rewrites where we're at.
Okay, well, we've covered 4 of them. What's the last one on your list of priorities?
I think we've covered 5. We did election integrity. We did immigration. We did DEI, which we started by calling ESG, and
Right.
then we did ESG, and then we ended by calling it DEI. Kind of a circular argument. And we talked about the property taxes. I also want to say, among the taxations, one of the successes we had was a $75,000 exemption on personal property used in a business. You always have to pay taxes on any equipment you use in a business.
Sure.
And we were able to get rid of the first $75,000 of that. There are some other things that are important. One of the things the Biden administration did was they came in, and if you're going to drill for oil, you got to have a bond.
Yeah, this is huge.
Yeah. And the bonds used to be, I don't know that I know the numbers.
They were reasonable.
Yeah, maybe $25,000 or something. And then they just went up exponentially so that none of the small oil companies could possibly keep up. They couldn't do it. So we came up with a plan where they could pool their resources, have a community bond, a corporate bond, so to speak, and got that passed. People probably don't realize it, but a lot of Wyoming's oil is produced by small companies that have they've acquired the rights to a lot of small wells, and they're just kind of milking what's left in it and trying to go through. Our friend Bill Alaman, was he Agent 54?
Yeah, Agent 54.
He takes care of a few oil wells like that. My oldest son manages an entire field full of those sorts of things. And along those lines, one of the things that we use to make those fields more productive for years to come, and understand that a productive field is generating income back to Wyoming. We're getting severance taxes on those. One of those techniques is to inject CO2 into the ground, and it forces the oil back out and greatly enhances the productivity. So we have a deal now where they will build a new coal-fired plant. This is one of these that has the capacity to separate the CO2. But rather than just take that CO2 and sequester it or stick it in the ground somewhere or store it, which is what's happening to most of the CO2 on the market right now, this would be dedicated to go directly to those small...
For the enhanced oil recovery.
Yeah, for the enhanced oil recovery. And it ends up effectively being a win-win. Now, it's very difficult for a conservative such as myself to vote for, I think in this case it was $10 million, to go into that sort of a public-private partnership. If you wanted to eradicate all of that, it would take you forever. There's a lot of that goes on. This, though, I think is going to pay us back many times over.
Excellent. Now that we've talked about the 5 and dime plans, I loved one of the pieces of criticism. God, I pretty much saw it everywhere, op-eds, social media, and I don't know where it originated, but I think it's kind of clever. A lot of folks were calling this the nickel and dime plan. Mm-hmm. But in my opinion, when you look at the breadth of the subjects that were covered, I think that criticism kind of falls short. There's a significant amount of legislation that went through and was either signed by the governor or he allowed it to become law. And so, I really don't give that one too much credence. But there were a couple of bills that I have some serious problems with. I think you and I probably agree about the state shooting sports complex. That got kind of convoluted there at the end.
It really did. Once you've gone down a path, there's no right answer anymore.
Yeah, well, so can you kind of explain exactly what happened there? Because it started out as an amendment, then it was a zombie bill, then it was an amendment again, and it got really confusing. So can you kind of try to clear that up a little?
A little. Originally, when the original action was taken last year, there was $10 million set aside pending some action taken by the 68th legislature. And so it was basically already set aside to go to there. And, this thing kind of got ahead of itself. I believe, there are some people who would argue otherwise, but I believe that a lot of commitments were made, a lot of expectations put up on this, that this is a done deal, right or wrong. And so they came to get the money, and of course the inclination is, well, we're not going to give you the money. Well, they've already done a substantial amount of work and research and put things together. I do think in the long run it's going to make money for the state in a pretty big way. But when they brought out, we're going to give another $10 million, so now it'd be 20, we said no. And that amendment failed. And Representative Art Wassett out of Casper, who was on the committee to set up this shooting range deal, he got to looking at it closely and got with the LSO folks. And incidentally, there's a lot of criticism about, we had a lot of poorly written bills.
Yeah.
You know, the bills are written by the same LSO that's been there before.
Yeah, I kind of laughed at that.
And they
one
were
myself.
scrutinized by a lot of the same people, whether it be agencies or whatever, you know. So that particular argument doesn't hold a lot of water. Are any bills that come out of our legislature perfect? Probably not. But I don't think these were any worse than ones that have been in the past. That said, his interpretation was all it needs is some action taken by the 68th. And so he said, if we allocate $1, that frees up that $10 million. Well, the $10 million is already tied up. We can't get to it. And incidentally, the $10 million came out of a fund that probably would have been wasted on other things that you and I wouldn't agree with anyway. So at least it was going to sort of something that we might actually enjoy.
Let's just pause right there for a minute, because that was kind of one of the selling points that I liked during I guess it was the 67th or legislature that passed it.
That was the pitch. Our good friend Mark Jennings, former representative from District 30, that was one of his points.
Yeah, and here's just to kind of like make it quick and dirty for my audience. So the funds were taken out of the tourism account, and as I understand it, the lodging tax was supposed to be $10 or $12 million, a relatively small amount of money, and then it was not going to exceed that. Well, what we found out is the lodging tax collected $40 million and is continuing to accrue money, by the way. Well, it's those type of funds, those types of dollars that get allocated to projects that probably are not good. And the big joke in the legislature is, well, if we didn't spend it on a shooting range, it would have been spent on drag shows.
Yeah.
Which, that sounds kind of hyperbolic, but it's really not that far from the truth.
Not that far.
So kind of one of the selling points. But then, the biggest criticism that I have is, Ken, I don't want the government anywhere near my guns. And this thing started out as, well, we'll turn it over to a private party. And that seems to be kind of gone by the wayside, hasn't it?
Yes and no. Control, yes. The control is going to stay within the state. And that's not, my first positive vote for it was contingent upon that this gets turned over to private industries. That's kind of gone by the boards. But they do have a pretty substantial plan worked out by people in the Cody area, a business plan. Do things always go according to plan? No, not necessarily.
Not when government's involved.
I'm reasonably comfortable that they have a pretty good plan and that this thing can proceed and not be a total fiasco. However, that said, once it went over to the Senate and went into concurrence, all of a sudden the $1 deal was gone, and now as we're going to give them a second $10 million, I think it came out of the general fund. That's part of the jiu-jitsu that happens. It's a system that's not perfect, and I'll tell you, when you're down there as a legislator, and these things are happening fast and furious, you've got several concurrence things going, you're probably involved in one or two of them, and that's where your attention is. And it is, I know it sounds like kind of a feeble excuse, but it's really hard to keep track of all the things that are going on and keep it straight, and mistakes get made. We make votes that later we would turn around and wish we hadn't made. And sometimes I'll go through and I'll look at the list of votes and I'll think, did I vote that way? Seemed like a good idea at the time. But anyway, it is not a perfect system and nobody's perfect. And if you're sitting out there listening to it, I could do a better job than that. They bring it. I'd rather go fly fishing.
Well, yeah. All right. So kind of back on topic a little bit. So they brought a bill at the last minute. The Senate did, they being the Senate. This is what I'm referring to as the zombie bill. It was past all of the deadlines. They pretty much didn't really debate it at all. It was if I remember correctly, it was advanced all the way to third reading.
Yeah, they set aside all their rules.
Yep, they suspended every single rule they had to get this bill out, and then it comes over to the House, and what happened?
To leadership's credit, specifically Speaker Nyman, Agent One.
Agent One.
Appropriate that he be the speaker, isn't it? Anyway, he could have made a decision just to bury this. He could have given it to Scott. Scott could have buried it. But they called a meeting of the whole House, and they said, what do you guys want to do with this? Consequently, it got buried, and that's as far as it went. I'm not really allowed to discuss, nor should I ethically discuss what went on inside
Fair enough.
that discussion.
I mean, all we really need to know is that it didn't go anywhere.
It didn't go anywhere.
Dead on arrival.
Yeah.
But as zombie bills usually are, it was not dead. And then there was an amendment added later in the Senate.
Yeah, so the zombie bill was dead, but the concept was not.
Yes.
It's kind of like the bacteria somehow spread. And in concurrence, that's where some of those ideas came in and infected what we thought we had a better deal. Let this be a warning to you as something you should not do.
Exactly right. Well, in the end, $20 million is going to this shooting range. And, you know, I guess I did like the argument that, hey, we've already said $10 million is going there. These folks have already put in a bunch of work. They've traveled to the SHOT Show. And, you know, do we really want to pull it back right now? I mean, I
You
get
also
that.
had, you know, some of Wyoming's integrity was on the line. Do you want to do business with Wyoming if they're going to go change? You know, and there was that. There were a lot of, it was a really, really tough decision. And Representative Mike Schmidt got up twice and gave really good, solid reasons. But if you walk into the legislature and you're completely black and white, no compromise whatsoever, frankly, you're not going to get much done. And I hate putting it that way. But that's the way politics works. There's some push, there's some pushback. There's give and take, there's compromise. And no bill ever feels perfect. But when you look at the 68th general session, I think by and large we did a good job and we moved the needle far to the right, the direction, you know, from it's been progressively sliding left forever. And I think we did a really good job there. I'm proud of what we did. I can find problems with many things that we did. But life is messy.
Well, and I think that evidence of what you're saying is that there were a lot of really conservative pieces of legislation that left the House of Representatives with pretty sizable majorities, you know, 40 votes, 50 votes. And that's very different from the 67th and definitely the 66th legislature.
Yeah.
Most of those votes, at least let's just talk about the 67th, like you could sit in the gallery and every vote was 36-26, 36-26, 36-26. And it was 36 redcoats and Democrats, and there were 26 people voting with the conservatives. So
we flipped the tables this time. It was a lot the same vote.
Yeah.
36-40.
And you know, I mean, I think that this point too bears a little bit of discussion, that you might agree with some folks on the other side, but for different reasons. You know, I saw Mike Yen voting for the shooting sports complex. Yeah. I had a funny conversation with him right after that vote, and I said, "Mike, voting for guns, huh?" And he said, "David, not for the reasons you think." He said, "We're spending government money. I'm a Democrat. I like to do that." And so, you know, sometimes you get folks that are ideologically not on your side voting for the same legislation, but for very different reasons.
Or helping each other. There was a time last year when Mike and I helped each other. There was a time this year when Carly and I kind of teamed up and helped each other a little bit. I know it sounds kind of crazy, and they may have different reasons, but in some cases, your job is to get rid of bad legislation.
Well, Ken, I appreciate you taking you back to the legislative session. I realize that was still kind of traumatic.
It is.
But let's talk about something that's a little bit more fun.
Please.
And I don't want to give away the ball game. I don't really want to give away too many details. But we're sitting in a new space for Cowboy state politics.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a new space. Period. To me, it's been modified, shall we say, made provision for Cowboy state politics to be able to expand a little bit, if I may say that.
Yeah, I think so.
And I'm looking forward to what's coming around the corner.
Yeah, me too. A lot more bells and whistles when you do a live program and a podcast. You got to have some things that are interesting and new, and I think that we've put together something that's going to be fun. Like I said, I'm not going to release too many details.
You better not.
At this 10 seconds, because we're still kind of putting things together. But I just wanted to give my audience a heads up that there's some fun new stuff that's headed your way.
I think in this business, and you and I have seen it, you get started, things move along. It always feels like more slowly than you like. And then you have some success, and then you kind of hit a plateau, and you have to look around and say, okay, what can I do different that might bring some other folks in?
Ah, yes.
And I think there's some good things that can happen.
Well, all I know is it's going to be fun. I'm excited to do it, and as in the coming days and weeks, I'll let everybody in on what we're planning. But I still think that we're about definitely a week out, perhaps 2, before we get it all put together and get everything.
So, folks, you can count on about 4.
Nah. Well, Ken, thanks again for sitting in with me. I appreciate it.
I appreciate being here.
All right. That'll do it for today's installment of Weekend Update. Have a good rest of your weekend, and we'll talk again on Monday. But for now, from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio, I'm David Iverson, and this is the one and only Cowboy State Politics.